So what exactly is the repository pattern? Well, before I get into a technical definition, perhaps a little example from science fiction will bring this alive. So I'm going to steal one of the best examples that I've seen at a high level. It's actually from this blog post, and I will refer to this blog often because he talks a lot about the repository pattern and shares many of my ideas, and I'll reference you to his work. But at any rate, at a high level, the author, Mike, describes a stasis chamber in a spaceship that's intended to essentially freeze the crew members until they reach their destination in deep space. So after initial liftoff from Earth, one by one, the crew members finish their work and they have to go into the stasis chamber. The crew members sit in their little stasis capsules, and then a stasis chamber operator, he pushes a button to send them into stasis. Now, the operator doesn't really know all the inner workings of the stasis chamber. He basically knows how to push a couple of buttons. You put a body into a chamber, you push a button to freeze them, and then you push a button to thaw them out, essentially. Now, how does it work? He doesn't know. It doesn't matter. And nobody cares. It just takes a live body, it stores it away, and then it retrieves it. And that's exactly how a repository should work. It's a machine that handles the details of long-term storage and retrieval, and it hides those details behind a friendly interface like a button. Or in our case, it would be a friendly method interface like the find by ID method to retrieve, the save method to either add new or to update any changes, or a delete method to remove it from the repository or from the underlying data storage. So it sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, as I said at the outset, there's an impedance mismatch between technologies and discrepancies between authors and technologists as to the right way to implement a repository. And so let's do this. We're going to begin at the very beginning. Martin Fowler was the first, to my knowledge, to actually write about the repository pattern in his seminal work, Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture. So on page 322, he says the following, and you can see that he posts at least the first parts of the definition on his own website. And so we'll just refer to that, and there should be a link right here where you can follow along. But he says here that a system with a complex domain model often benefits from a layer, such as the one provided by Data Mapper, we'll look at that in a minute, that isolates domain objects from details of the database access code. Okay, so far so good. Separate the domain model from the data access code. Got it. He references the Data Mapper pattern. So this pattern is a little bit more generic. It's a higher level pattern. And in his book, on page 165, he says the following. And again, he has posted that to this URL as well. And we'll start here in this third paragraph that begins with the word the Data Mapper. It's a layer of software that separates in-memory objects from the database. Its responsibility is to transfer data between the two and also isolate them from each other. With Data Mapper, the in-memory objects need to know that there's even a database present. They need no SQL interface code and certainly no knowledge of the database schema. The database schema is always ignorant of the objects that use it. Since it's a form of mapper, Data Mapper itself is even unknown to the domain layer. And then he also says throughout that chapter that there's a lot of variety in how mapping layers are built. The whole layer of Data Mapper can be substituted either for testing purposes or to allow a single domain layer to work with different databases. When it comes to inserts and updates, the database mapping layer needs to understand what objects have changed, which new ones have been created, which ones have been destroyed, and so on. It also has to fit the whole workload into a transactional framework. We'll come back to that in a moment. He also says, remember that you don't have to build a full-featured database mapping layer. It's a complicated beast to build, and there are products available that do this for you. For most cases, I recommend buying a database mapping layer rather than building one for yourself. Okay, so what does the Data Mapper pattern sound like? It sounds like things that Microsoft has introduced in the past, things like ADO.NET's SQL Data Adapter, SQL Command, and Datasets, or more recently, the Entity Framework. back to the topic at hand. Some systems benefit from separating the domain model from the data access code. And then Fowler will go on to say, in such systems, in such systems, it can be worthwhile to build another layer of abstraction over the mapping layer where query construction code is concentrated. This becomes more important when there are a large number of domain classes or heavy querying. In these cases particularly, adding this layer helps minimize duplicate query logic. Okay, so we have the data mapper. It already abstracts the basic CRUD operations away from the domain layer. Fowler says that the repository sits on top of the data mapper in order to provide query construction. What is query construction? It's where you construct specific queries required by the domain layer classes to retrieve back the proper set of domain objects that it needs to work with. This separation provides several benefits. He lists one right here. It helps to minimize duplicate query logic. He also goes on to say the following. A repository mediates between the domain and data mapping layers, acting like an in-memory domain object collection. So the repository pattern creates a mediator between the domain layer and the data mapping layer. In our case, it's the mediator between the domain layer classes and the entity framework or other data access technology that serves as the data mapper. Okay? Easy enough. He also says that objects can be added to and removed from the repository as they can from a simple collection of objects. And the mapping code encapsulated by the repository will carry out the appropriate operations behind the scenes. Conceptually, a repository encapsulates the set of objects persisted in a data store and the operations performed over them, providing a more object-oriented view of the persistence layer. Repository also supports the objective of achieving a clean separation and one-way dependency between the domain and data mapping layers. Okay, so good conceptual overview of what the repository is. And we'll start diving into the various pieces of this throughout. But before we do, let me briefly clarify a few things. First, we're talking about a design pattern called repository. The pattern describes an abstraction of functionality into a class and the interaction of that class with both domain layer classes and data access technology used for data storage. However, confusingly, at times, this term, repository, can refer to a couple of different things depending on the context. It can refer to a single class that implements the repository pattern. It can refer to a logical grouping of classes that all implement the repository pattern, almost like a layer unto itself. And it can also represent an interface that repository classes implement, such as the iRepository of T that we're going to talk about throughout the series. So ideally, we as humans would always express our intent correctly and precisely, but that doesn't always happen. And you won't get far in life by being a literalist or a perfectionist. Just be aware of the context and use some common sense. The word repository could refer to the pattern or a class that represents or that implements the pattern, or classes that implement the pattern, and so on. Okay? All right, so that's all I have to say in this lesson. We're going to dive deeper into some of this definition that was kind of thick and wordy with regards to how to do query construction and pull out just the entities, converting them into domain or data transfer objects that then get used as domain classes, beginning in the next lesson. So we'll see you there. Thank you.